Hi, everyone. This is our introductory lecture to Twelfth Night, one of my favorite plays, and actually a play in which it was my second play that I ever did, a Shakespeare play. I did play Olivia. I was 15 at the time, and I think I've still got pictures. What is Twelfth Night? Well, Twelfth Night in the liturgical calendar is the eve of the Epiphany. This is the 12th night of Christmas. Remember that song, The 12 Days of Christmas? Well, there are really 12 days. And this is when the Magi are approaching. And what do they bring? They bring gifts, gold, incense, and myrrh. That's going to figure in some of the themes of the play, in that there's a lot of gifting and a lot of money exchanged and a lot of festivity. More on that in a moment. Twelfth Night is a play in Shakespeare's professional growth that marks kind of an end to his sunnier plays, his sunnier comedies. And Twelfth Night has a rather dark end that Malvolio is not so happy. And the very last line is, "I'll be revenged on the pack of you." And throughout the play, we become complicit in some of the darker themes. So academic scholars of this play tend to see this as a transitional play from less fraught plays such as Midsummer Night's Dream or Much Ado About Nothing to plays that contemporary people might even not consider comedies, like Measure for Measure. So Twelfth Night has a lot of nostalgia in it, a lot of merrymaking, and a great number of characters, all of whom could be considered the star of the play, depending upon who's doing the producing. But first of all, let me walk you through some of the major themes. And one of them is the theme of the sonnets. Now, if you're not familiar with Shakespeare's sonnets, a primary theme for the first third of them are a sonnet that is written to a young man by an older man, and the older man is addressing the younger man to get married. These sonnets are all addressed to a man who is wealthy, handsome, from an aristocratic family. He has a duty to get married and have children and pass on his name, his wealth, his title, and his beauty. We're going to see this in Act 1, Scene 5, when Viola encounters Olivia, and Olivia is in mourning. And I'm going to just introduce these themes, and I'll then go through them one at a time. We've got some of the elements of early modern comedy, and we have the nostalgia for kind of a romanticized past. You know, nostalgia ain't what it used to be. But this is a nostalgia for a time before the proto-capitalist enterprises in early modern England booted an awful lot of people off their land, made a lot of people homeless, made people redundant. Then, as now in contemporary North America, economies were shifting, traditions were shifting, religious beliefs were shifting. And there was a nostalgia for a time that, when you remember it, all the rough spots are sanded off. A time where you could live on a great estate and you were taken care of. You were clothed and fed and housed, and you worked for a lord or a lady. And we have love and sexuality, because this is a Shakespeare comedy after all. So as you can see, all of these hot spots here, these links work except for a few. I can't fix the links right now because my old desktop doesn't have a functioning Adobe Acrobat on it, but all but one of the work. I tried them earlier today. So the sonnets thematically revisited. When Viola encounters Olivia, and she realizes that Olivia has absolutely no interest in getting married, we hear an echo of the theme of the sonnets. And here's one. And I thought I would include a sonnet. This is from the initial production of the sonnets, not without Shakespeare's permission, by the way. It's known as the Book of Q now. Only one was published in his lifetime. They were all sold, and very, very few of these books remain. And they weren't published again in Shakespeare's lifetime. So there is some question as to whether or not Shakespeare ever wanted these published in his lifetime. The production of poems was a private affair done for a patron, whereas the production of plays was a commercial affair done for the theatrical company that was going to perform them. So here's one of the poems that is on the theme of marry and pass on your beauty. As fast as thou shalt want, so fast shall thou grow in one of thine from that which thou departest. And that fresh blood which youngly thou bestowed, thou must call thine when thou from youth converteth. Herein lies wisdom, beauty, and increase. Without this, folly age and could decay, if all were minded so. The times should cease, and 80 would make the world away. Let those whom nature hath not made for store, harsh, featureless, and rude, barrenly perish. Look whom she best endowed, she gave the more, which bounteous gift thou shouldst in bounty cherish. She carved thee for her seal, and meant thereby thou shouldst print more, not let thy copy die. The sonnet is saying, nature made you beautiful, and beauty should recreate itself. Let those ugly buggers over there with no teeth and the limp hair and this disformed figure, fine, let them perish without any copy. But you're gorgeous, darling, you gotta get married, have children. This theme happens again and again in the sonnets. So there is some speculation that when Shakespeare was producing Twelfth Night, this is the time when he was writing the sonnets. We don't have any proof, but it is interesting that these are when the sonnets are echoed in this particular play and this particular theme. Now, one of the things that we're going to see in Act 1, Scene 5 is a blazon. And a blazon is a certain type of poem that that goes on and on about the beauty of a woman. Her lips are like rubies, and her skin is like white milk or snow, and her eyes are like stars, and blah, 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 blah. You may recall Shakespeare's sonnets, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun." That's him sending up the blazon. So when we encounter Olivia, she knows that she's beautiful, and she wears a veil. And when she lifts the veil and she allows herself to be seen, and Viola says, "How dare you not leave the world a copy of such beauties?" And she goes on to list what they are. So I'm just going to read this right now to make sure I'm on track. We see this same playful inversion in Olivia's original encounter. And she will list all her features as if they are in a will. So the major characteristics of the comedies, and it's kind of shocking that this is the first time we're going through it this semester. I need to rethink that. So they trace the course of young love that ultimately triumphs despite obstacles. Remember my joke, comedies end in marriages, tragedies begin with them. They begin in trouble and end in peace. They depict romance and end in marriage, or the promise of marriage. In this case, we don't actually see the marriage. For some reason, Orsino wants Viola to stay in her, he does not want to see her in her women's weeds until such a time as they can make the marriage ceremony. Scholars make a lot out of that line. In comparison to the tragedies, they employ character types rather than fully individualized characters. And it's true that the characters here tend to be pretty superficial. Viola is arguably the most fleshed out character, and in a way, Feste is, only because his lines hint at a backstory. In comparison to the tragedies, they emphasize the female experience. There's no death. They reward virtue and they punish vice. And here we get a hint at Shakespeare's feelings about Puritans. And more on that later. The Puritans weren't one group, but more like the ultra-conservative group, the group that's afraid that somewhere, somehow, someone is having a good time. And Malvolio comes in for a lot of punishment, as he is described by Maria as some kind of Puritan. The world, it revolves around a contrast of worlds, often youth or age or country or city. In Twelfth Night, we have two worlds. We have the Duke Orsino's world, and we have Olivia's world. They bring renewal to particular characters as well as to society. Twelfth Night is a society that when Viola and Sebastian enter it, it's sterile. Orsino is pining away for an idea of love, and Olivia is pining away because of the deaths of her father and her brother, and nobody's getting it on with anything. There's no spring, there's no marriage, there's no babies, there's no life. They're in stasis. It's like they're in amber. And it is the arrival of our twins, Viola and Sebastian, that shake things up, because these two young, healthy folk are normal, and they want to find spouses, and they want to make a life and have babies and get the world turning again. And right now the world is in stasis when they arrive in this mystical, magical world of Illyria. They are fundamentally lighthearted and exuberant. And as I mentioned, this play does have a darker side to it. So it's the last of the lighthearted plays, hinting at darker plays to come. And they are meant to make us laugh at ourselves and the absurdity of being human. And certainly Sir Andrew Aguecheek, that's how you pronounce his name, Aguecheek, and Malvolio, I think we can recognize a little bit of them both in ourselves from time to time. Now, there's a PowerPoint that should be below this talk, and I want you to go through that as well. That's a little more descriptive about some of the other major themes of the play, and I'm going to just leave it at that. And of course, we have love and sexuality. If music be the food of love, play on. Give me excess of it. That surfeiting the appetite may sicken and so die. That's the opening line of the play. And notice that this play is the most musical of all of Shakespeare's plays. By now, Robert Armin had become the king's men's, no, Elizabeth is still on the throne. This is the last play that Shakespeare will write during Elizabeth's lifetime. She dies after this play is produced. But Robert Armin had become the theater company's fool. He was their professional comedian. And he was a cerebral, quiet type of fool. He wasn't the bouncing around, ad-libbing type of character. And he was very musical. He was a gifted singer and musician. And Shakespeare seems to use his talents and exploit them, because this is the first play to feature so many songs. And I think it has more songs than any other play. Now, we have a couple of types of love here. We see agape, the love of God for his creation, and we have philia, the love of friends for one another, and we have eros, erotic love. So let's look at the different dynamics here. We've got Orsino to Olivia. Now, technically, we could say this is erotic love, but is it really? He hardly knows her, and she's not interested in him. He seems to be more in love with the idea of love. He seems to enjoy the suffering of it all. You just know if this were a 21st century man and he was 16 years old, he'd be in his basement bedroom somewhere listening to emo music and moping around and, you know, having shaggy hair. We have Olivia, who is in love with mourning. She, just like Viola, has lost a father and lost a brother. Now, Viola doesn't know that her brother is alive. So these two women have a symmetry. Their fathers are dead and their brothers are dead. And Olivia is mourning. She has the luxury to be in mourning. She is not a widow, but the closest thing to it. She is an unmarried woman in charge of an extraordinarily wealthy, large, and rich estate. I know that was redundant. And Malvolio is her right-hand man. He's kind of the CEO of the small business. He's got a very powerful position in her household. Even though he's a servant, he's the number one among equals as far as servants go. We have Olivia for Cesario. She is in love. It's an erotic love, but she's also in love with a fantasy, and we know why, because Viola is a girl and Cesario is just a pretense. Maria is in love with Toby. She wants to marry Sir Toby, and the Trevor Nunn movie makes a very nice job of that. You might recognize the actress who plays Maria is the actress who played one of the bad characters in the Harry Potter movies, the one that liked all the kittens, the really vicious, mean one. Same actress. She does a wonderful job here. And we see in the way that Trevor Nunn does a nice compression of a number of scenes when he has Feste, Bing Kingsley sing, "O Mistress Mine." She joins him in the last stanza, and it's made very clear that she's longing to have a place in the house that isn't a servant's place. However, again, I want to add that in early modern England, if you were a daughter who had not been married off, or if you were the second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth or seventh son, if you were a son who did not inherit, there were only so many options for you. And if you were of a certain class, and you could be quite high up there in the aristocracy, and you have either not married or found a specific job for yourself, if you're a man, you could spend the rest of your life as a servant in another household, but not a servant the way we think of servants with a cap and gown, yes and no, ma'am, that sort of thing, but as someone who, more like a paid companion. So while Malvolio does have a very high position, Maria is more like a professional. She's less of a servant and more of a lady in waiting. She is Olivia's best friend. She serves her, but she also listens with her and jokes with her. And likely they would probably share a bed. Very few people slept alone. It's cold in England. Body heat is very useful. So servants would often share a bed with their masters. Now, Toby, what's he in love with? He's in love with fun. He loves being irresponsible. He's drunk throughout the entire play. And depending upon the production, he can be loving and charming and irascible, or he can be quite cruel and rather hard to like. And the Trevor Nunn production veers towards the hard to like. The actor does a wonderful job, but you kind of find yourself wondering what Mariah is pining for, because the lines in the actions of this actor and from the result of the director's direction, Sir Toby is quite cruel, and the lines are said in that way. Now we have Sebastian, who is Viola's brother, and he's a kind of a Dudley Do-Right. Oh, Savior, no, he's just kind of upright, and I'm going to go do things, and I'm going to be brave and go out there. And Antonio is a sailor who has saved his life, and Antonio does seem to have quite a bit of a crush on Sebastian. He does seem to love him in an erotic fashion, and Sebastian is utterly innocent of any of that. It just seems to go right over his head. And then we have Malvolio, a better exemplar of self-love you're not going to find. So who is Feste? Now, Feste is the professional fool who belongs to the house of Olivia. He belonged to Olivia's father. After Olivia's father died, Feste kind of went a walkabout. He kind of took off for a while, and he is now returned. So what he did was kind of technically not allowed. You're not allowed to leave your employer's employee unless they give you leave, which he had not. So the first thing he needs to do when he returns is ingratiate himself with Olivia. He has to charm her by giving her these wonderful little puzzles that encourage her to remember why he was funny and why her father loved him. And Ben Kingsley does a wonderful job of playing a rather mournful Feste. And these two links should work. I know this one works, and this is the Ben Kingsley one. I think if you Google Twelfth Night Branagh director, you'll be able to pull up some of the scenes from a 1980 production of Twelfth Night that was based on a live production directed by Kenneth Branagh. The BBC wanted to film Branagh's directorial version, but Branagh did not direct it. Did you follow that? So it's kind of like his play's direction once removed. And you're going to recognize quite a few of the actors in that play. So this link doesn't work, but you can Google Twelfth Night Branagh director. You can Google Anton Lesser, and you're going to see him, a very young Anton Lesser, playing the fool. I think we might look at this in Thursday's class. Act 1, Scene 3 is a very funny scene. However, it's extremely complex, and the lines in it require you to do a lot of, oh, what is that annotation? Well, you're going to kind of be bobbing up and down like this, because all of the remarks that happen, they're not funny anymore. They've lost their meaning. But primarily it is Sir Toby telling Mariah that he's keeping Sir Andrew Aguecheek around because Andrew is a fool, a well-meaning and good-natured fool, and he has a lot of money. Toby doesn't have money. He's literally sponging off of his niece. He's drinking up all her booze. He's drunk day and night. He's staying there on her good graces, and he's going to reach the end of those good graces. And Andrew has money that Sir Toby doesn't, so he wants to keep Andrew around, and he's trying to encourage Andrew to woo his niece. Andrew doesn't have a chance in hell to get Olivia. There's absolutely no way, but he's such a fool, he doesn't know that. So we might look at that a little more closely. I know that this version with Alec Guinness, and it was made in 1970. So if you have never seen a younger Alec Guinness, if you click on this, go to 15 or 16 minutes in. The production, there's more in front of this than the last time I made this link, but this link works, and this link will take you to an entire production of Twelfth Night done in Australia, and Geoffrey Rush is in it, and they all have Australian accents, so that's a lot of fun. Now here, Sir Andrew is a carpet knight. What that means is during Queen Elizabeth's reign, she was a very wise and parsimonious queen. Parsimonious is a 50-cent word for cheap. she made money in every way she could to bolster up the royal economy. And one way she did that was you could buy yourself a knighthood. You paid the crown so much money, and then on the carpet you would kneel and you would be knighted. And now you have the title of a knight without having to do the work of becoming a knight. So Andrew Aguecheek is always played by very tall, skinny, usually blonde men, or they have a blonde wig because his hair is blonde and compared to a distaff. And we'll talk about that when we meet on Thursday. So he's someone who is technically a knight, but he wouldn't make it, he wouldn't last one day in the military, let's put it that way. And so there's a lot of vulgar humor in Act 1, Scene 3. It's very funny, but it does take a fairly close reading of the annotations. Now, when we get to Act 1, Scene 5, and we have Viola doing the work of wooing for her master, Duke Orsino, to Olivia, this was kind of standard operating procedure. You didn't woo on your own. You didn't woo for yourself. You had someone do it for you. Now, you may send letters and you may send gifts, but someone else will be your emissary. If you've seen Much Ado About Nothing, you'll see the same scene where the Count, I can't remember his name, but Claudio is in love with Hero, and he sends his boss, the gentleman who was in charge of him when they were in the wars, and his boss woos Hero on Claudio's account. The same thing is happening here. The boss, Duke Orsino, sends his new, young, beautiful boy page, young man page, doesn't have an Adam's apple yet, doesn't have much of a beard yet, over to be his emissary to Olivia, who's like, oh, for heaven's sakes, this fellow again, please. Until she goes, wait a minute, who are you again? Now, so that's the standard operating procedure of wooing. And what happens in this scene is that Viola, in the guise of Cesario, doesn't follow the script. You're supposed to walk in. You're supposed to say, "Oh, beauteous maid," and you're supposed to recite a speech that you've memorized. Except she says, "Oh, I'm sorry. Can I look back at my notes? I memorized this speech, and now you've interrupted me, and I don't know where I left off, and I need to start again." You're not supposed to do that. Then she stops the script, and she addresses Olivia in a way that only another woman would address a woman playing the game that Olivia is playing, where a male page would have no frame of reference to understand that while Olivia is not playing hard to get, she doesn't want to be got by Duke Orsino. She is disinterested in him. She doesn't dislike him. She just has no desire to marry. But she still is playing the feminine game. And Viola, in the guise of this masculine character, calls her on it. So I already mentioned that we've got the sonnets reflected here. And so my joke is that up here, that Viola as Cesario has kind of an insider training benefit to her wooing. Now we've got, I believe both of these links work, and this is a beautiful rendition of "O Mistress Mine." And I wanted to give you an image of, this is the music of the spheres. Music features very profoundly in Twelfth Night. And there was this imagination that because God set up the universe and everything is in a circle and it circles within circles, the angels can hear the music that is made with all of these circles turning round and round, this angelic music that humans cannot hear, but it does exist. So here's an example of it. And all right, so I'm out of my images. So I would like to read you a quote from the Arden Shakespeare. Arden is it's one of the best anthologizers and publishers of Shakespeare because they contain some of the most recent scholarship and usually the longest introductions, which we think is a good thing. You probably don't, and wonderful annotations. And I do want to read, who's the author of this? Dr. Keir Elam is the writer of this introduction. And I just want to make one more note upon the Twelfth Night festive Saturnalian release that we see in this play. It is literally the time when people celebrated, when they drank, they feasted, they stayed up late, they sang songs, they wore costumes, they gave gifts to one another. And this, again, is a Catholic tradition. And it's being phased out by Protestant England. And particularly people who were the most conservative, and they now fall under an umbrella term that we call them Puritans. But there were a number of Protestant sects who were extremely severe, who did not like to see anything celebrated Shakespeare. I'm sorry, that was not a Freudian slip. They didn't like Christmas festivities. And you've probably heard every Christmas time we hear about this war on Christmas, which is a fantasy. You want to know who really had a war on Christmas? Puritans. When the folks who were the biggest wet blankets and couldn't make everybody else be blankets came over the big wet Atlantic Ocean and landed on these shores, one of the first things they did in their colonies was to outlaw the celebration of Christmas. Outlaw it. It's the Puritans who didn't like Christmas. Just wanted to clarify that. And this is just a particularly well expressed idea about one of the things that's happening here with the celebration. And I can't top it, so I'd rather just read it. The ideological implications of the Saturnalian reading may not be as simple or as neutral as they seem. If the comedy is taken to reenact the century-long struggle between the old Merry England, with its vestiges of Christianized pagan ritual, and the reformation of English customs and manners, then the punishment of the Puritan Malvolio looks like revenge comedy of a particularly historical and cultural kind. The play's comic plot becomes the expression of nostalgia for a pre-Reformation world, part of a late Elizabethan phenomena that the social historian Ronald Hutton describes as, quote, a sentimental reaction in favor of old-style popular merrymaking among writers and their patrons. And this book, Ronald Hutton's The Rise of Merry England, it's on its way to me, and it should be here by next month, something coming from Britain somewhere. When we get together on Thursday, I'm going to go into depth, Act 1, Scene 5, and we're going to look at all of Act 2. And please make sure and look at all of the links and all of the PowerPoints and notes that I have on our week 14 12th night. And see if I can get rid of this. And I look forward to hearing and seeing all of you Thursday. Have a good afternoon.